Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into it, looking at the 116th Street crew in New York City.
Yeah, a fascinating slice of organized crime history. We've pulled together quite a bit to trace their story.
We have. It goes way back, late 19th century, and believe it or not, they're still around in some form today.
Which is pretty incredible when you think about it.
Our goal here is basically to give you a solid, detailed picture of this one crew. Who were they? What were their rackets? How did they fit into the bigger mafia picture?
And it's not a straight line, is it? Lots of twists, lots of turns. Really tells you something about how power works in that world.
Definitely. Okay, so let's dig in. Where do we start?
Well, the very beginning, you've got the Morello brothers arriving from Corleone, Sicily. That's Giuseppe, Niccolo, Vincenzo, and Ciro Terranova. This is the 1890s.
Right, and they settle in East Harlem's little Italy. What do they do first? Just set up shop?
Pretty much. They jumped into the classic stuff, black hand extortion, leaning on local businesses, plus illegal gambling, always a big one.
And this became the 116th Street Mob, or the Morello Gang.
Exactly. Those were the early names for them. But they weren't content with just East Harlem.
Ah, right. They had bigger ambitions. Lower Manhattan's Little Italy. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the goal.
That was the prize. But it was controlled by Ignazio Saietta, Lupo the Wolf, a big name back then.
So you'd expect a war, right? A turf war.
You would, but interestingly, no. Instead of fighting, they actually formed an alliance. The Morellos and Saietta joined forces.
Wow, okay. And Giuseppe Morello, he climbs the ladder.
He does, rises to become capo di tutti capi, basically the boss of all bosses. A huge consolidation of power, really, for the early New York scene.
But alliances like that, they don't always last, do they?
Not in this world. 1910, boom. Both Morello and Saietta get arrested. Counterfeiting charges.
Major setback. So, who takes over?
Well, while they're gone, roughly 1910 to 1915, it's the Lamonte brothers running things in East Harlem. They were Morello's cousins.
But that didn't end well for them either, did it?
No, it was a violent time. Fortunato Lamonte killed in 1914, his brother Tommaso in 1915. Seems like control was always up for grabs.
All this instability, it must have led somewhere.
It did, straight into a much bigger conflict. The Mafia Camorra War. Niccolo Morello steps up to lead the crew, and they get pulled right into this massive fight.
Okay, break that down for us. Mafia Camorra War.
So you've got the Sicilian Morello Terranova family, our guys, basically, versus the Neapolitan Camorra gangs from Brooklyn, led mostly by Pellegrino Morano.
And what were they fighting over? Just New York?
Oh, much bigger than that. They both wanted total control of all Italian gangs, not just in the city, but across the U.S. national ambition.
High stakes. How did it go?
Well, things took a nasty turn for the Morellos when Nicholas Terranova was murdered. September 1916, that gave the Camorra the upper hand, at least for a while.
So who stepped in then?
Leadership fell to the remaining brothers, Vincenzo and Ciro Terranova. They kept the fight going.
Did the tide turn?
Sort of. The police started cracking down harder, and a lot of the top Camorra guys got arrested. That weakened them significantly.
And what happened to the Camorra guys left?
They basically saw the writing on the wall. The remaining groups decided it was better to join forces with the Sicilian gangs. An uneasy peace, maybe?
So the Morello Terranova side essentially won.
You could say that. And after that, Vincenzo seemed to focus more on Brooklyn operations, while Ciro really dug into expanding their turf in East Harlem and the Bronx, kind of specializing.
Okay, moving into the next big era, Prohibition. Roaring 20s. What's the crew up to?
Ciro Terranova is the main man now. He becomes really well known, famously as the Artichoke King.
The Artichoke King. Seriously, how did you get that name?
He cornered the market on artichokes coming into the city. A bit unusual, but hey, it was profitable alongside the usual rackets. He ran the 116th Street crew with a firm hand during Prohibition.
But his reign didn't last forever, right? We see this pattern.
Exactly. By 1935, new powers were rising in the wider mafia world, and Ciro was, let's say, strongly encouraged to retire.
Forced out, basically. What happened to him?
It's kind of a sad end, actually. Ran into financial trouble, went bankrupt, lost his home, ended up moving back into the old family building, a real fall from grace.
So, another power vacuum. Who fills this one?
This is where Michael Coppola comes in. Trigger Mike Coppola. Sometime between 32 and 36, he takes over the crew.
Trigger Mike. Sounds like a character. What was his big thing?
Well, besides running the crew, he took over the illegal numbers racket in Harlem and the South Bronx. This was huge money.
Wasn't that Dutch Schultz's territory before?
Exactly. Schultz controlled it before he was permanently removed from the picture. Coppola stepping into that shows you how interconnected these operations were and how lucrative.
So Coppola's running a major moneymaker for the family.
Absolutely. That numbers racket was a gold mine. Okay, fast forward a bit. Late 1950s, the big boss, Vito Genovese, he gets sent to prison.
Right. What happens then? Does the whole thing fall apart?
No, they set up a kind of committee, a ruling panel, to manage the family while Genovese is inside. And guess who's on it?
Let me guess. Trigger Mike Coppola.
You got it. Shows you how high up he'd climbed, part of the family's top leadership.
But the pattern continues. Coppola doesn't stay on top forever either.
No. Early 1960s, he gets nailed for tax evasion, does his time, gets out in 63, and then, just like Terranova, he's basically retired, sent off to Florida, put out to pasture, you could say.
It really is a cycle, isn't it? Okay, so Coppola's out. Who's next in line for the 116th Street crew?
Now we get to a really big name. Anthony Salerno. Fat Tony.
Yeah. Heard of him. He was Coppola's guy.
Started out as a soldier under Coppola way back in the 30s. Just worked his way up very patiently. When Coppola got sidelined, Salerno was right there to take over the crew and all those rackets, especially that massive numbers empire Coppola inherited from Schultz.
Where did Salerno operate from? Did they still have a base?
Oh, yeah. The Palma Boys Social Club. East 115th Street. That became the nerve center. Looks like just another neighborhood club, right?
But it was the headquarters for a major criminal operation.
Totally. Salerno and his brother Sereno, Charlie Speed, they called him, ran a multi-million-dollar gambling racket right out of there. East Harlem, South Bronx.
And this is interesting. The neighborhood was changing demographically around this time, wasn't it?
Significantly. But somehow, Salerno's crew managed to keep control, keep employing locals in their street operations. It shows how deeply embedded they were. Real staying power.
Salerno wasn't just running the crew, though, was he? He kept climbing within the Genovese family itself.
Absolutely. He became consigliere, like the top advisor, then underboss. And by the early 80s, he was the acting boss, or at least the front boss for the family. Huge influence.
But that kind of power attracts attention, the wrong kind.
Always does. The FBI zeroed in on the Palma Boys Social Club. Late 70s, early 80s, they managed to get bugs planted inside.
Ooh, that's bad news for Salerno. What do they hear?
Everything. It was a gold mine for the feds. Salerno talking business, criminal activities, with his own guys, even with other big bosses like Anthony Tony Ducks Corallo from the Lucci's family, just laying it all out.
That leads to
The Mafia Commission trial, mid-80s, a landmark case. The FBI used all that surveillance plus the RIIO statute.
right, the anti-racketeering law. That lets them go after the whole organization, not just individuals.
Exactly. They indicted Salerno and the heads of the other big New York families, and they convicted them. It was a massive blow to the mob.
What did Salerno get?
100 years. Sentenced in January 1987, a huge sentence, effectively life.
So that's the end of Fat Tony's reign. But knowing this crew, not the end of the story.
Not at all. Even before Salerno went down, a guy named Liborio Belomo, Barney Belomo, was taking over the crews day to day. Early 80s, kept things running in Harlem and the Bronx.
And Belomo moved up, too.
Yeah, he eventually became the street boss for the official boss, Vincent the Chin Gigante, who was also doing prison time in the 90s. The hierarchy adapts.
What happened to Salerno in the end?
He died in prison July 1992.
And Belomo? Did he stay in charge?
He had his own stints in prison, too. During those times, you had various acting leaders stepping up. Guys like Frank Farby Serpico, Ernest Ernie Muscarella. It shows that constant shuffle at the top when bosses get locked up.
Quite a timeline when you lay it all out. From Giuseppe Morello, way back when.
Right through Terranova, Coppola, Salerno, Belomo. And reports suggest guys like Michael Hippie Zanfardino have been involved more recently. There's this clear, if sometimes bloody, line of succession. The crew itself endures.
We should also mention the informants, right? They play a big role in these stories.
Definitely. Vincent Fiscafaro, for instance. He was Salerno's right-hand man for years, then became a government witness. His testimony was crucial.
And there was that thing with the Purple Gang.
Oh, yeah, the East Harlem Purple Gang. They were a pretty dangerous independent crew in the 70s. Eventually, the remaining members were sort of absorbed into the 116th Street crew structure in the late 70s, early 80s. Shows how these groups consolidate power.
And unbelievably, as we said at the start, the crew is still considered active today.
It really is something. Testament to, I don't know, deep roots. Adaptability, probably both.
So, if we wrap this up, we've seen the 116th Street crew start as this tight Morello family gang. go through massive wars and alliances, become a core part of a bigger crime family, the Genovese family.
And survived leadership changes, major prosecutions like the commission trial, neighborhood shifts. It's quite the saga.
What stands out most to you looking back over all this?
For me, maybe that early alliance between Morello and Sayeda, it was pragmatic, avoided a war that could have wiped them both out early on, changed the whole initial landscape.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think figures like Ciro the Artichoke King and especially Fat Tony Salerno really defined certain eras. Their influence was massive.
Absolutely. And just their sheer persistence, holding on to that territory despite everything changing around them. That ability to adapt or maybe just dig in is pretty remarkable.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about how these local power struggles, happening street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood, are shaped by and also shape these bigger historical forces.
Yeah.
Prohibition, Ragaho laws, social changes.
Yeah, and it leaves you wondering what other stories like this are buried in the history of our cities, these hidden dynamics of power and survival that we just, never really hear about.
A good thought to end on. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.